You're watching the Stories That Scare channel. There is no turning back now.
Three true 5 nights at Freddy's Horror Stories. Hey everybody. I'm glad y'all stopped by. Tonight, we're celebrating one of the biggest horror franchises ever created. On August 8th, 2026, it will be exactly 12 years since the very first 5 Nights at Freddy's game released on August 8th, 2014. What started as a small indie horror game quickly became something much bigger. Video games, mobile apps, best-selling novels, graphic novels, a blockbuster movie, merchandise, action figures, board games, escape rooms, even theme park attractions and fan experiences. No matter how you discovered Freddy Fazbear, there's a good chance you remember your very first jump scare. For millions of fans, Freddy's wasn't just a game. It became an obsession. Late-night theories, hidden clues, secret endings, trying to piece together a story that somehow became even scarier the more you learned. Tonight, these aren't game recaps. These aren't lore theories. These are 3 original horror stories inspired by the world of 5 Nights at Freddy's. Whether these stories are true, I'll let y'all decide. Story 1, Night 6. My obsession with 5 Nights at Freddy's started the same way it did for everyone else. A YouTube video. I watched someone scream their way through Night 1. I laughed, downloaded the game that same night. Eventually, I played every game, read every book, watched every theory video I could find. By the time the movie came out, I'd already spent years trying to solve the mystery. So when an antique store downtown advertised original Freddy's security equipment, I had to go. The owner pointed toward an old cardboard box. Inside, broken cameras, wires, employee badges, stacks of faded paperwork. Near the bottom, I found an old cassette tape. Written in black marker were 2 words, Night 6. I smiled. Probably some fan-made prop for $10. I bought it. That evening, I found an old cassette player in my garage. The tape crackled. Static filled the speakers. Then, a tired man's voice. "If you're hearing this..." I didn't make it. I laughed. The acting was surprisingly good, the voice continued. "I finished Night 5, but they told me there was another shift." I paused the tape. Night 6. That sounded familiar. I pressed play again. "You won't find it." Inside the game. The tape suddenly stopped. I rewound it. Played it again. This time those final words had changed. "They're waiting. Where you play." At that exact moment, my computer turned itself on. The monitor glowed. Even though I'd shut the computer down an hour earlier, the screen was completely black, except for one line of white text. 12 a.m. then. The familiar security office appeared. I smiled. Someone had made a fan game. The graphics looked almost identical to the original. Only there was no menu, no title screen, no options, just Night 6. The phone rang. I almost laughed. Of course it did. I clicked the receiver. Static. Then the same voice from the cassette tape. Only now. He sounded terrified. I told them. I quit. They said, "I'm still on the schedule." The call abruptly ended. I checked the cameras. Show stage, empty. Dining area, empty. Pirate Cove. Curtains closed. Everything looked normal. Until camera 4B, the East Hall. Someone was standing there. Not Freddy, not Bonnie, not Chica, a security guard facing the camera. His uniform looked decades old. He slowly raised one hand and pointed directly at me. I switched cameras, then switched back. He was gone. The clock changed. 1 a.m. without warning. Every camera filled with static. The office lights flickered. When the image returned, every animatronic had disappeared. Every single one. The building looked empty. Then, movement, not on the cameras. Behind me. I spun around. Nothing. The office door was still closed, the fan still spinning. I laughed nervously. This is getting good. I turned back toward the monitor. The office camera was now active. I frowned. There isn't an office camera. There never has been. Yet, there it was, a live feed, looking directly into my room. I watched myself sitting at my desk, perfectly still. Then, The version of me on the screen. Looked up. Not at the monitor. At me. He smiled. Slowly. He stood, walked toward the camera, and whispered, "Wrong office." The feed went black. A loud metallic clang echoed somewhere inside my house. I tore my headphones off. The sound hadn't come from the game. It had come from downstairs, like heavy metal striking tile. I grabbed my flashlight, walked to the top of the stairs. Everything below was dark, completely silent. Then, a child's laughter. Soft, brief, coming from the kitchen. I flipped on every light. Nothing. Every chair was exactly where I'd left it. No open doors, no broken windows, no sign anyone had been inside. When I returned upstairs, the game was gone. My desktop looked normal, except for one new folder. Employee records. Inside was a single file, a photograph. It showed 6 security guards standing in front of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. 5 of them wore faded uniforms. The 6th was me. At the bottom of the photo, someone had typed, "Congratulations, you've completed orientation." Most fans spend years wondering, what happened after night 5? Maybe some questions were never meant to be answered. All right, let's move on to story number 2. This next story begins with a collector who finally found the rarest 5 Nights at Freddy's book ever printed. One that was never supposed to leave the publisher. Story 2. The Unprinted Chapter. I've collected 5 Nights at Freddy's merchandise for years. The games. The novels. The graphic novels. The movie steelbook. Action figures. Even convention-exclusive merchandise. If it had Freddy's on it, I probably owned it. One afternoon, I stopped at a used bookstore I'd never visited before. Most of the shelves were exactly what you'd expect. Old paperbacks, cookbooks, history books. Then, on the very top shelf, I spotted a familiar spine. 5 Nights at Freddy's, only it wasn't one I'd ever seen before. The cover was plain black, no artwork, no title. Just the Freddy Fazbear logo embossed into the cover. The owner noticed me staring at it. "Oh, I wondered when someone would finally ask about that." He carefully climbed a ladder, handed me the book. There isn't a barcode. No publisher. No copyright page. Some guy sold it years ago. I opened it. The first several chapters looked normal, almost like an early draft of one of the novels. Then, about halfway through, the page numbers stopped. Every page after that was completely blank. I laughed. "Printing error." The owner shrugged. "Maybe. It keeps coming back." I smiled politely. "What do you mean?" "I've sold it 4 different times. Every few months. It's back on that shelf. For $15. I bought it anyway." That night, I started reading. The writing was surprisingly good. It followed a night guard, much like the games. But there was something strange. The main character didn't have a name. Whenever the story introduced him, it simply said, "You." Around midnight, I reached the first blank page. I closed the book, went to make coffee. When I came back, there was writing on the page, fresh ink, still glistening. I frowned. The words hadn't been there before. It read, "You decide to keep reading." I slowly turned the page. More words appeared, one sentence at a time, as though someone was writing the story. While I watched, you hear footsteps upstairs. At that exact moment, a heavy footstep echoed from my hallway. I froze. My house was empty. Another sentence appeared. "You tell yourself it's the neighbors." I laughed nervously. That's exactly what I'd been thinking. Another line slowly faded onto the paper. "You're wrong." The lights flickered. The book continued writing itself. "You walked toward the hallway." I closed the book. "Nope." Not happening. I wasn't about to play along. I shoved it into a drawer, locked the drawer, went to bed. The next morning, the book was lying on my kitchen table. Opened to a brand new page. Only 4 words had been written. "You delayed the ending." I drove back to the bookstore immediately. The owner looked up as I walked inside. Without saying a word, he nodded. "You finished chapter 12, didn't you?" I slowly placed the book on the counter. "I'm done with it." He didn't touch it. Instead, he slid another receipt across the counter. It was dated 3 years earlier. Someone else had returned the same book. Scrawled across the bottom, in shaky handwriting, were 6 words. Don't let it reach chapter 13. I looked down at the book. The page had turned by itself. At the top, a brand new chapter title had appeared. Chapter 13. Underneath, only one sentence. This time, the story already knows your name. The scariest thing about Freddy's has never been the jump scares. It's the feeling that no matter how much you learn, there's always another page waiting. We've got one last story, and it begins with a fan who downloaded what he thought was an old mobile version of Five Nights at Freddy's, only to discover it wasn't made by Scott Cawthon, at least, not officially. Story 3, The Forgotten App. I still had my old phone, the one I used back in high school. Cracked screen. Terrible battery. Barely enough storage to update anything. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning out a drawer, I found it. After an hour on the charger, it somehow powered on. I started scrolling through old photos, old text messages, games I'd completely forgotten about. Then I saw an icon. Freddy's face. The original Five Nights at Freddy's mobile app. I smiled. I hadn't played the mobile version in years. Out of curiosity, I tapped it. Instead of the familiar title screen, a black screen appeared. White text slowly faded in. Welcome back. I frowned. The app had never done that before. Then, another message. You left before your final shift. The screen changed. Not to night 1, not even night 5. It simply read, Night 13. There is no night 13. At least, not in any version I'd ever played. The office looked familiar, but older. Dust covered everything. The fan wasn't spinning. The security monitors flickered constantly. Even the phone on the desk had been ripped off the wall. The only thing that worked was the camera system. Every room was empty, except one, the prize corner. A little boy stood there, his back faced the camera. He wasn't moving. I switched cameras, then switched back. He was gone. A message appeared across the bottom of the screen. Don't watch the animatronics. Watch the children. For the next several minutes, the game was silent. No music, no footsteps, just cameras. Every time I switched, another child appeared, standing perfectly still, watching the camera, one by one. They disappeared, until only one remained, the little boy from the prize corner. This time, he was facing the camera. His eyes were completely black. He slowly lifted one hand, not waving, pointing directly behind me. I laughed nervously. I know this trick. I refused to turn around. Instead, I kept staring at the screen. The boy continued pointing. Then, he began shaking his head. Slowly, desperately. As if he wasn't pointing at something behind me anymore. He was warning me not to look. A notification suddenly popped up on the phone. Front camera activated. I never opened the camera. Yet, there it was. A live image of me, sitting in my chair, holding the phone. Behind me, standing in my hallway, were 4 figures. One tall, one rabbit, one chicken, one fox, perfectly still, watching. The phone vibrated. The image refreshed. The figures had moved closer. Another vibration. Closer. Again. Closer. Until they stood directly behind my chair. The little boy disappeared from the game. The screen went black. One final sentence appeared. You looked at the wrong screen. Every light in my house shut off. Complete darkness. Then, somewhere behind me, I heard a familiar sound. A slow, mechanical laugh. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, the lights came back on. The phone had powered itself off. I tried turning it back on. Nothing. The battery had somehow drained to 0. The next morning, I plugged it back in. It booted normally. Every app was still there. Except one. Five Nights at Freddy's had completely disappeared. A week later, I bought a brand new phone, signed into my account, started downloading my old apps. As the download bar filled, a notification appeared. Restoring previous progress. I never tapped restore. Then, a second notification. See you on night 14. Maybe that's why Five Nights at Freddy's has remained so popular after all these years. Whether you found it through the original game, a mobile app, a theory video, a novel, a graphic novel, or the movie, one thing has always been true. Once Freddy's gets your attention, it has a way of keeping it. If you enjoyed these stories, let me know which one unsettled you the most. Was it Night 6, the Unprinted Chapter, or the Forgotten App? And tell me, how did you first discover Five Nights at Freddy's? Was it the original game, a YouTube playthrough, the books, the movie, or maybe the mobile app? I'd love to read your stories in the comments. Who knows, your experience might inspire a future episode. Until next time, keep the fires burning, and as always, I'll tell the stories, if you'll stay scared.